Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Between Two Earnings Calls with Mr. Investor Relations. I'm your host, 𝗕𝗿𝗏𝘁𝘄𝗲𝗏, and in today's video, we're going to discuss the investor relations job market and particularly our statistical update on the market for the second quarter of 2025. So let's get into the data. So when we look at the key takeaways around the second quarter, it starts with this idea that we saw a strong recovery in June after a trough in May. If you recall some of our earlier reports, we saw significant weakness in May, which was well below 2 standard deviations below the mean in May, and signaled the same weakness as November of 24 and late 2023. When you look at conversion rates, the first quarter was rough, the second quarter was strong, and that gave us an average about 9%, which again is outside our norm in terms of an expected range of 10% to 21% in terms of conversion. Conversion trends are mixed, and they seem to be tariff-driven. When the government is really focused on tariffs, conversion goes down. When the government backs off of tariffs, conversion seems to go up. Discussions around jobs seem to be perfunctory. The feel I've gotten lately is that a lot of times if you get into a conversation, it's a justification for an internal promotion. And then we saw multiple cancellations in the second quarter. Shake Shack and NBC Universal both canceled roles all over. However, Shake Shack filled their role ultimately. And then what we're seeing is strength at the lower ends of the market, director and lower. And ultimately, we're seeing weakness in July and August. So what are we going to do coming soon? These are some of our reports we're working on. We're looking at the IR job market by capitalization over the last 3 years and how that ebbs and flows in terms of who's looking. Does applying through Workday equal an automatic rejection when you apply? We're going to work on profiling the people who have gotten these IR roles that we tracked over the past 3 years. And then we're going to have our typical updates of the third quarter 25, as well as our monthly updates for July and August, as well as September. So this is a new dashboard we've created, which is the second quarter market health dashboard. And what we're doing is showing you what the market is expected to look like on the left versus the actual results on the right. And in terms of an expectation, we expect to see between 30 and 42 IR jobs in a given quarter, with the number of calls ranging between 3 and 9, and the conversion rate ultimately being between 10 and 21%. As you can see in the actual results, we had a good second quarter. We saw 35 opportunities, 6 calls, and a conversion rate of 17%. Therefore, the second quarter in whole was a healthy job market. Now, the opportunities, the calls, conversion rates all fell within our expected outcome ranges. But again, the key here is that market health seems to be deteriorating as we move into July and August. So let's get into our typical growth analysis. Here we're going to look at total investor relations job opportunities. And what we see is year over year, we saw a 24% decline in terms of all job opportunities, all levels. And then on the 2-year stack, we were up 29%, which was improvement from our last update. And again, the market seemed to be rebounding from tariff uncertainties as we closed out the second quarter. Now, the second quarter of 25 was weaker than 24, but a lot better than the second quarter of 25. Now, when we get into total market, or that total 30-month period, the market peaked in August of 24, and we've seen kind of pockets of strength with several months above our 18 average. Again, May was a low due to tariffs, and then June saw a nice rebound. Now, the question is this a sustained market recovery? Now, when we look at number one IR jobs, or top level IR jobs, we saw a 20% decline year over year, and we saw a 9% growth in the 2-year stack versus flat in our last report. And again, tariff uncertainty was dissipating as we exited the quarter, and the IPO window was opening. So there seemed to be excitement and reason to be happy about the IR job market. Again, we saw expansion in the market from the second quarter of 23 to 24, but we saw a decline from 24 to 25. Now, looking at the cycle from January of 23 to June of 25, the number one IR job market really bottomed out in May when you saw 6 opportunities. It hadn't been that bad really since late 2023. And we saw a great recovery in June. We went from 6 to 15. Now, the question is, will the recovery be sustained in the second half? And I think right now, we don't expect that recovery to be sustained based on what we're seeing in July and August data. So let's get into the conversion data analysis. Now, when you look at the all-level market, we ended up hitting 53 jobs for the quarter. And so we saw a recovery in June, again, offsetting May's tariff uncertainty. And again, the market is robust at lower levels, but the top IR market remains a struggle. Now, you look at the conversions, we saw a rebound in the second quarter, and we saw opportunities rebound in June particularly, but we did not really see a rebound in the conversion rates in June. And that conversion rate has deteriorated into July and August. So let's look at the top IR job market, or number one IR job market. Again, June saw an offset of that tariff uncertainty in May. The total opportunities in the quarter hit the 2-year average of about 35. And now the question is, what's going to happen in the second half of 25? You look at conversion rates, the first quarter was awful at 2.4%, really indicative of tariffs and the changeover in the presidency. Second quarter saw a rebound when we hit 17%, but the average for the first half is 9%, which is below our expected range of 10 to 21% in terms of conversions. So there's reasons to be concerned about that number one market. Now let's look at the historical conversion rates, because I think this is instructive. And when you look at it, this is how we did in the cycle, from January of 23 to June of 25, based on quarter. Second quarter of 23 was the best. First quarter of 25 was the worst. And second quarter of 25 ranks as one of our better quarters, but it doesn't have that feel of strength when you really look at the data. Now, if you look at the data here historically, this 9% conversion rate for the first half is really well below historical norms in a given year. What's interesting is when you look at a given year, we range between 11 and 21%, which is our statistical expectation just based on January of 23 to June of 25. So again, there's two ways to show that you should be getting conversions between 10 and 21% when you're searching for an IR job. Now let's look at some statistical analysis to see how we got there. And when you look at all IR jobs in the second quarter, we expected there to be between 45 and 62 jobs total. Ultimately, we got 53, which signals a healthy market. When you look at the number one IR job market in the second quarter, we expected to be between 30 and 42 jobs on a 10 to 21% conversion rate, which led to 3 to 9 calls. And our actual stats were 35, 17%, and 6 interviews or calls, which means June was a healthy market. The second quarter was a healthy market. Now, what we're seeing in terms of July and August data, we are not seeing the health that we saw in June and in the second quarter of 2025. So next, we're going to go through the list. This is the list of some of the key employers looking for top investor relations professionals. Call out Arrow Electronics, Rocked, Waystar, BJ's Wholesale, Travel and Leisure, Insight, MongoDB in June. In May, you saw Pinterest, Keysight, Meta, HubSpot, Digital Realty. And then in April, we saw NBC Universal, Porch, UHS, Apellis, Tempest AI, Fortune Brands. So the jobs are out there. It's just a matter of getting in the mix and obtaining the opportunity. And as we look at it, this is our appendix. We're roughly up to about 24% of New York listed companies and 16% of NASDAQ listed companies of the jobs we've attracted or applied to since January of 2023. This number keeps going up. I hope you really enjoyed this analysis. We're going to do this going forward every quarter and every month because we think it's good data and it allows investor relations pros to really get a sense of how is their job search performing relative to the market. Thanks for watching.